the 1950s, America had broken free from the shackles of wartime economics. It was walking with the swagger of a nation that had the world by the tail. Scientists had harnessed nuclear energy. Jet-propelled airplanes were breaking speed records, and the race to space was on. But perhaps more than anything else, one thing melded imagination and consumerism, putting this era in perfect context. The concept car. Unlike satellites, rockets, and jet planes, these dream cars were accessible. People flocked to auto shows to see concept cars in their titanium-bodied glory. They were snapshots of how America perceived its future. They were simply out of sight, unforgettable. But what happened to them? Most were destroyed. Some just plain vanished. But amazingly, some are still here. Introducing the 1948 Tucker Sedan.
When the car was in New York, they charged 48 cents per person to see the car because they had so many people coming to see it. It actually outsold Annie Get Your Gun, which was the #1 Broadway play at the time.
And introducing the 1934 Bendix SWC.
The car was built on the sly. They did it all in secret. It was kind of an off-books, skunk works projects, if you will.
The 1948 Tucker Sedan was launched at the perfect time. It was a fresh-looking car in a market full of outdated styles.
During World War II, car production stopped throughout the nation. You couldn't buy cars. All the effort went towards the war effort. So when the first cars were reintroduced, they basically looked like 1942 cars, just told the people, oh, no, it's till 1946.
Preston Tucker, a man with big dreams but very little money, wanted to change that. Cars were always part of his life. He learned to drive at the age of 11. At 19, he joined the police force so he could drive the high-performance cars and motorcycles. He was eventually thrown off the force for making unauthorized modifications to his police cruiser. He bounced from job to job, running a gas station, working on the assembly line for Ford, and selling Studebakers. During the war, he designed and built gun turrets that were used on PT boats, landing craft, and bombers. When the war ended, he set out to create his own car.
Tucker had a brand new idea. He came out with a brand new car, completely different styling, put the engine in the rear, has a center headlight that turns with the steering wheel. A lot of different things in the car are very far advanced.
It was billed as America's first completely new car in 50 years.
He just had this burning desire during the war that when we get back into production, we need to produce a car the American public wants, not what the car manufacturers are telling them they want.
The result was a car loaded with unique features.
It has a Cyclops headlight, and it turns with a steering wheel, and it would light your way around the corner. And we look at that today and think, what the heck, what were they thinking? But in reality, look at your cars today. They either have turning lights on your side of the car. There's cars today that have bendable headlights. So we are trying to do the same exact thing that he was doing back in 1948.
The turning headlight was just the beginning. The Tucker sedan was packed with safety features.
The Tucker has the first padded dash of any car, first pop-out safety windshield.
There was also an invisible crash zone. The car's frame is modeled after race cars of the time. It protects the driver and passenger in case of a head-on collision. This was important because seat belts were still a few years away. The doors open out from the middle. While that is a stylistic holdover from the 30s, everything else about the doors was new.
If you were to take a Tucker and open the door, either one of them, they raise up 2 inches so they'd go up over the curb. The drip edge you would typically see in a car for the rain gutter, that's hidden inside the doors. The doors are cut up into the roof. So it's the little things that he came up with that other people never gave a thought to.
The engine in a Tucker is in the rear, but the location isn't the only thing that makes it special.
It's a helicopter engine, but you have to remember a helicopter is designed to run at full throttle all the time. You don't just idle in a helicopter, right? So with a car, you could just go forever with it.
If it ever did need to be repaired, that was easy to do.
You could pull it out in 15 minutes, unbolt it and unsnap it from an electrical connection and pull it out.
The car was also designed to be easy to build.
The front seat and the back seat are interchangeable, so he had a lot of things that he thought it'll help get it into production. The Tucker was very futuristic. Even when you look at it today, it looks like it's moving, even standing still. In 1948, it was a huge success as far as the reaction of people they wanted something new. They'd just gone through a war. They finally can buy an automobile, buy a new truck or a new car, and they wanted something different. They had just seen all the technology and the advances during the war, but yet they're seeing these cars that look like a 1941 or 42. So when Tucker came out with something that was stylish, that was fast, that had all these different features, it was phenomenal.
Preston Tucker had a dream and a beautiful car, but he was entering a marketplace dominated by massive corporations.
You got to remember, you've got the car companies that have been around forever. They've got money, they've got backing. He really didn't have enough money, so he went out and got dealers signed up. He went out and sold stock and got about $21 million to put this project together.
$21 million was a lot of money in 1948. It got Tucker noticed, but not the kind of attention he wanted.
Securities and Exchange Commission said, wait a minute, you're selling dealerships, you're selling stock, and you're selling pieces and parts to a car you never intend to build.
In classic Tucker fashion, he went big. He leased the Chicago Dodge plant. During the war, it had built engines for B-29 bombers. It was the largest factory in the world at the time. He started building prototypes immediately. Not just one, he built 50.
Every Tucker ever produced is a pilot car. None of them are identical. They all have little things they were changing, trying to figure out what would work.
As soon as a car was finished, Tucker would put it on a stage.
We tried to get the cars out there. He got a lot of publicity for them, and they showed them all over the country and had a lot of interest.
This car differs from other cars in many features. We have tried to design a car designed around the slender profiling. This car is designed mainly around safety features. We have some 67 safety features. This car will be on the market soon.
They would hold a showing at an armory or a big stadium or maybe a dealership, and people would come to see the car, and that would travel all over the country. But because they didn't have a car to sell to you right away, he would sell you an accessory package. So in that accessory package, you could get seat covers that maybe you use on your 37 Buick that you're driving, or a radio that you could put into an old pickup truck you're still running, or a heater. So for $236, you'd go to your dealership, see this fantastic car, buy these accessories, and by buying those, you got your name on the list. So when a particular car came to that dealership, you could buy it.
The public ate it up.
When the car was in New York, they charged 48 cents per person to see the car because they had so many people coming to see it. It actually outsold Annie Get Your Gun. which was the #1 Broadway play at the time.
But the government didn't like his business model.
That's ultimately what caused the red flag that got him in trouble. Securities and Exchange Commission said, wait a minute, you're selling dealerships, you're selling stock, and you're selling pieces and parts to a car you never intend to build.
When word got out that Tucker was being investigated by the government, panic set in. Stock in his company fell from $5 a share to $2. Even more costly was the loss of consumers' confidence. If people thought the company was in trouble, they weren't going to pre-order a new car. With no new cash coming in, Tucker had to close the factory doors. In 1949, he was indicted on charges of fraud.
In reality, we know there's about 40,000 blueprints that they had already drawn up on every piece of the car. They had over 2,000 employees, and they had over 2,000 dealerships set up just in the United States alone. So I think it's hard to say it was a sham.
2 years later, a jury found Preston Tucker not guilty. But the long court battle had already driven him into bankruptcy.
I think what happened is he was a visionary when it came to design and what the customer wanted, but maybe not well-funded and maybe not the best businessman. I think he maybe burnt some bridges along the way.
Amazingly, almost all of Tucker's prototypes are still around. Car number 47 sits at the Gilmore Car Museum in Western Michigan.
It's only got 60 original miles on it, and all that's just from loading it onto a trailer or driving it here in the grounds. So there's no telling what our car would sell for. One car sold at auction not too long ago for $2.9 million and another one for $1.2 million.
Those are pretty valuable cars, considering the entire project ended in financial ruin for its creator.
I think part of the appeal of the whole Tucker is that story of it's this guy that had great vision, great ideas, ran into several roadblocks, was actually brought up on charges that forced him into bankruptcy. I don't know if you'd call that a failure. I think he achieved a lot, and it'd be interesting to see what would have happened if he got into production. I think that's the appeal. It's that whole what if.
They only built one. You'll never see another Bendix SWC Steel Wheel Corporation car.
Steel Wheels Corporation is a very generic sounding name for a very spectacular automobile, and that's by design. While most concept cars were built to attract attention and build brand recognition, the makers of this car did everything they could to keep their creation a secret. Vincent Bendix was a giant in the automotive world.
He is one of those rare people who has a car part named after him, the Bendix starter drive, frequently referred to as the Bendix. It was his invention that basically allowed the self-starter to be adapted to millions of automobiles and just about every automobile that was built from the teens on, and really made the automobile easy to use for people. Back in the early days, automobiles, gasoline engines had to be started by a hand crank. You would have to put the crank in front of the engine and pull up on it at the right time and hope that the spark and the gasoline were right and it would fire over. Occasionally the engine would backfire and this would kick the crank back around, occasionally breaking a wrist or an arm, or if you got your head in the way or something like that, as once in a while did happen, rather serious injuries could occur. So every time your car starts up, tip your cap to Mr. Bendix.
By the 1930s, his company had expanded into making brakes, gear shifts, carburetors, and pretty much anything else the big three automakers needed for their production cars. But Vincent Bendix wanted more. He wanted to make a whole car.
They did it all in secret. It was kind of an off-books, skunk works projects, if you will. They created the Steel Wheel Corporation, which was a completely fictitious organization, but is mainly to disguise the fact that Bendix was looking at building an automobile because his largest customers were Ford, General Motors, Chrysler. He did not want them to think he was entering into competition with them because he still wanted their business.
Imagine you had the contract to sell ground beef to McDonald's, Burger King, and A&W. Then one day you decided to open your own restaurant. You'd definitely want to keep that quiet.
They really built a very advanced automobile. And when the car was completed, they actually never showed it in the United States. It was only shown in Europe.
The car was a rolling catalog of all the products Bendix Corporation was making at the time.
It's got Bendix brakes, Bendix axles, I think it's got a Bendix radio in there. The carburetor's a Stromberg, made by Bendix, and just about every other component you care to name on there that they could put on there, they did.
It was also a peek into what they hoped to produce in the near future.
If you look at the Bendix car's wheel cover, you see it has kind of reverse, like trailing edge slots on there, and those were designed to extract the heat from the brakes as the wheels turned.
Inside, it had a clock in the hub of the steering wheel, and it forever changed the types of pedals that go beneath your feet.
If you look at most cars from the 1930s, the pedals go through the floorboard and they actually pivot from below. On the Bendix car, the pedals are suspended from the firewall or from up top, so they swing.
Not all the ideas caught on.
The Bendix car's cooling system is a very unique system. It's not something I've seen on any automobile before or since. It basically operates as almost like a condensate cooling system, almost like a steam system. It has an enclosed cylinder head. Cool water goes through like a perforated tube, and it moves down onto a pool of water, and that evaporation process from the cool water hitting the warmer water is actually what cools the engine.
The body style was distinctive at the time, but not exactly one of a kind.
Many people who look at the Bendix car look at it and say, oh, they must have copied it off the Chrysler Airflow. Well, actually, the two cars were developed almost simultaneously, separately from one another, so purely coincidental its looks compared to the Airflow's looks.
Officially, there were never plans to produce the SWC as a production car, but with a man like Vincent Bendix at the helm, anything was possible.
Vincent Bendix could probably best be described as a very strong personality. He was definitely a full speed ahead type of guy, lived a fairly substantial lifestyle.
Ultimately, it was his flamboyant, free-spending ways that killed the car project.
Some people, stockholders, did not care for Bendix's lifestyle.
His free-spending ways were bad for his reputation. The Great Depression was bad for business. Stock in Bendix Corporation was in free fall. Between 1932 and 1934, it dropped $100 a share. The shareholders revolted and squeezed Vincent out of the company he had founded. Without him there to save it, the SWC concept was discarded.
They only built the one, and they actually never really finished the project as it stood. The car needed some additional engineering work done on it, but unfortunately with Mr. Bendix's kind of being pushed aside at the time, the project never got beyond really the early developmental phase.
The car went into hibernation, tucked away in a warehouse for 30 years. until it was rediscovered and put on display at the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana. The car's inventor, on the other hand, stayed very active.
Was always, like any entrepreneur, he was always looking for that next thing. What's my next challenge? What's my next, success going to be?
That drive led him into the aviation industry, where Bendix Corporation became pivotal in the early days of helicopters. Not all his ventures were successes. His 1934 Sedan certainly wasn't, but his starter drive is still being used today, meaning thanks to Vincent Bendix, you don't have to risk life and limb turning a hand crank to start your car in the morning.